There is a document hidden at the very back of the New Testament that takes, well, honestly, less than 2 minutes to read.
Yeah, it's incredibly brief, just 15 verses long, I think.
Right. And there are no grand theological treatises in it, no apocalyptic visions of dragons, no sweeping narratives of empires falling. It is simply a leaked first century memo about a toxic workplace.
That is the perfect way to describe it, actually. It's
Hmm.
about a bitter power struggle and really the logistical nightmare of running a decentralized startup.
Exactly. So today we are welcoming you to a deep dive into how the absolute shortest book in the Bible, this tiny piece of ancient correspondence, became a timeless masterclass on the dark side of leadership, the economics of hospitality, and the grand level meaning of community.
Right, we are looking at the third epistle of John, which is commonly known as 3rd John. And to guide this analysis, we're relying on a really comprehensive document. It's Chris R. Velazquez's Survey of 3rd John.
And that survey gives us a lot of the historical context, right?
It does. It provides a really rigorous historical, literary, and theological breakdown of these 15 verses. Because the value of this specific text is that it forces us to look at the ancient world not through the lens of high theology, but through the lens of human dynamics.
Which is so fascinating because when an author only has a few inches of papyrus to convey an urgent message, I mean, every single word carries immense weight.
Absolutely. There is zero room for abstraction here.
All right.
Everything is immediate, practical, and highly consequential.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. For everyone listening right now, we are not going to treat this text like some fragile religious artifact sitting under glass in a museum. We are treating it as a living case study.
Yeah, we're going to break down how these early Christian networks actually function when the original founder started dying off.
Right. We will examine three incredibly distinct character profiles. A generous host, a toxic gatekeeper, and a vetted messenger. And we're going to see why the drama happening in someone's living room in the late first century maps perfectly onto the organizational and community struggles you experience today.
Because the stakes of this tiny letter are really difficult to overstate. I mean, the Christian movement during this specific window of time was undergoing a massive, perilous transition.
Things were shifting rapidly.
Exactly. The era of the original apostles, the foundational figures who held unquestioned universal authority, was coming to an end. The movement was shifting into a decentralized network of autonomous local communities spread across the Roman Empire.
So the survival of this entire movement depended entirely on whether these local groups could, manage their own leadership, share their resources, and protect themselves from internal bad actors.
Right, and they had to do all of that without a central headquarters dictating every move.
I want to focus on that transition because before we can diagnose the drama happening inside this specific community, we really have to look at the mechanics of the letter itself. Our source, the Velazquez survey, points out that while 3rd John is the shortest book, it carries a very heavy anchor.
It definitely does.
Because the author doesn't use a name. He doesn't open with a grand title like the Supreme Bishop of Asia. The very first verse simply says, the elder.
Yeah, just the elder.
And I was thinking about this. If I get an email at work and it's just signed the founder, I know exactly who sent it, and I know I don't have the option of ignoring it.
Right, you're opening that email immediately.
Exactly. But that kind of signature relies entirely on a massive amount of shared history and relational clout. So who is this elder actually thought to be?
Well, the identity of the elder has generated centuries of scholarly debate. The traditional dominant evangelical view identifies him as the Apostle John, writing very late in his life.
Okay, so the guy who wrote the Gospel of John.
Right. And the argument here rests heavily on internal evidence. I mean, the vocabulary, the theological themes, and the specific pastoral tone of 3rd John align almost perfectly with 1st John, 2nd John, and the Gospel of John.
There's like a linguistic fingerprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is a distinct Johannine dialect, a specific way of talking about light, truth, love, and witness that just permeates all these texts.
But the text itself never explicitly says, hey, it's me, John the Apostle. So it has to be inferential. I'm assuming that ambiguity leaves the door open for other theories.
It does. A significant scholarly alternative proposes that the elder refers to a distinct figure known as the Johannine presbyter.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Well, this would be a recognized leader who operated in the exact same region and theological stream as the Apostle John, but was a different historical individual. Some scholars push it even further, suggesting the letter is the collective voice of a broader Johannine community or school of thought.
Got it. So it could be a group using that title.
Right. But the prevailing framework remains the traditional view because those internal linguistic fingerprints are so strong. But the ambiguity itself is sociologically revealing, I think,
How so?
because the community was relying on relational historical authority rather than formal bureaucratic titles. He didn't need to prove his rank. His relationship with them was enough.
That relational authority is what fascinates me. And if we place this in the timeline, our source situates the letter roughly between 8085 and 8095, likely written from the region of Roman Asia Minor, with tradition often pointing to Ephesus.
Yes, that's the established window.
So we are decades past the events of the Gospels. The initial explosion of Paul's missionary journeys is over, and our source emphasizes that this letter reflects a pre-persecution, ordinary church setting.
Which is a really crucial detail.
It is, because when I picture the early church, my brain immediately goes to Christians hiding in the catacombs and Roman soldiers kicking down doors. But that's not what's happening here at all.
No, not at all. The popular imagination often flattens early Christian history into this constant, uniform bloodbath of state-sponsored persecution. And while there were certainly localized outbreaks of severe violence under emperors like Nero and later systemic persecutions under Decius or Diocletian, this specific time and place was different.
Right, the late first century in Asia Minor.
Yeah, for this specific network, it was largely a period of uneasy tolerance. I mean, there are no emperors mentioned in 3 John. There is no threat of martyrdom. The threat is not external state violence. It is entirely internal.
The danger is coming from inside the house.
Exactly. The conflict is about growing pains. It is about competing claims to local leadership, the management of shared funds, and how to verify the credentials of outsiders. It is an ordinary church setting, dealing with the utterly mundane but highly destructive reality of human ego and organizational friction.
Which raises a massive question for me. We have an incredibly short memo about an internal dispute over who is in charge of a local house church. It doesn't introduce any new, sweeping theological doctrines.
Nope, nothing like that.
And on top of that, its authorship was heavily debated early on. Our source notes that the ancient historian Eusebius documented early canonical hesitation about 2nd and 3rd John.
Yeah, they were heavily scrutinized.
They were essentially placed in the disputed pile before eventually being accepted into the New Testament canon. So if this text is so brief, so hyper-local, and its origins were questioned, how did it possibly survive to sit next to heavyweights like the Gospel of Matthew or Paul's letter to the Romans?
Well, texts in antiquity did not survive in a vacuum. 3 John was preserved because it was embedded within the broader manuscript tradition of the Johannine writings. Our source specifically highlights Codex Sinaiticus.
Which is a major manuscript.
Huge. It's a monumental 4th century manuscript that serves as one of our oldest complete Greek New Testaments. 3 John is physically preserved there. But its theological survival, why the early church ultimately deemed it indispensable, is because it provides the ecclesial mechanics behind the high theology.
The ecclesial mechanics, meaning it shows how the theology actually works when real people try to live it out.
It demonstrates what the profound, abstract ideas of the Gospel of John look like when they crash into the reality of a local power struggle. The early church recognized that theology without practical governance is useless. 3 John is the user manual for how a community centered on truth and love handles a hostile takeover.
Wow. And to understand that takeover, we have to look at the primary social mechanism driving the entire plot of this letter, because the conflict isn't about theological nuance, it's about logistics.
It's entirely about logistics.
Right. It's about people knocking on front doors, which forces us to look at the nightmare of first-century travel and the immense complex economics of ancient hospitality.
Yet the central crisis of 3 John is predicated on itinerant ministry. The Christian network in Roman Asia Minor relied on missionaries, teachers, and gospel workers who were constantly on the move.
Just bouncing from town to town.
Exactly. They traveled from city to city to establish new congregations, deliver correspondence, and maintain the doctrinal unity of this decentralized network.
For the listener trying to picture this, we really need to strip away our modern concepts of travel. Today, if an organization sends a representative to a new city, they book a flight, secure a rental car, and check into a corporate hotel.
And you have company card for meals.
Exactly. It is a highly sanitized transactional process. The Roman Empire had an incredible road system, but they didn't have corporate hotel chains. If you are a traveling teacher arriving in a new city where you don't know anyone, where do you sleep?
Well, you would be forced to rely on the public inn, the capona. And the historical reality of the first century inn is incredibly grim.
I can only imagine.
They were notoriously unsanitary, structurally unsafe, and deeply embedded in the criminal underbelly of the Roman world. They were frequently fronts for prostitution, and travelers were regularly targeted for theft or assault.
So it's not exactly a Holiday Inn.
Definitely not. A traveling Christian missionary could not safely lodge in a public inn, nor could they use it as a base of operations to teach or gather new converts.
So the public infrastructure is a non-starter. This means the early Christian movement had to create its own private infrastructure. And that infrastructure was the house church.
Exactly.
But again, we have to adjust our mental imagery. We aren't talking about a dedicated religious building with a steeple and pews. We are talking about domestic architecture.
Right. The foundational unit of the early church was the household. Wealthier members of the community, those who possessed a Greco-Roman domus or a large apartment with a sizable triclinium, which is the formal dining room, would host the local assembly.
Okay, so the wealthy guys are opening up their big dining rooms.
Yes, but their responsibility did not end with hosting a weekly gathering. The cultural and practical expectation was that these local leaders would open their homes to the itinerant workers.
This completely upends our modern, sanitized definition of hospitality. Today, hospitality means having friends over for a dinner party, opening a nice bottle of wine, and everyone goes home by 10 p.m.
Or maybe letting a friend crash on your couch for a weekend.
Right. It is a temporary, low-stakes inconvenience. But the hospitality demanded in 3 John sounds less like a dinner party and more like acting as an angel investor for a startup. But the requirement is that the entire development team moves into your living room indefinitely.
That is a very accurate analogy. The economic burden was immense. Greco-Roman hospitality was never merely private etiquette.
What did it actually entail?
It meant providing secure lodging, provisioning the travelers with food for the duration of an undefined stay, ensuring their physical protection in a society where foreigners were inherently vulnerable, and crucially providing substantial financial support and supplies for their onward journey to the next city.
So you are fully underwriting their mission. You are taking on their entire economic reality.
Yes. And our source highlights a specific Greek term the elder uses to describe this dynamic: synergoi, fellow workers.
Fellow workers, I like that.
The theological logic of the letter insists that by housing and funding a missionary, the local host is not simply performing a charitable act, they become a synergos, a fellow worker for the truth.
Because they're enabling the work to happen.
Exactly. The local believer who provides the bed, the bread, and the travel funds shares equally in the ministry credit and the spiritual responsibility of the person doing the public preaching. The mission is inherently corporate.
But for you, the listener, trying to map this onto your own experience with organizations or communities, whenever you have a system that relies this heavily on private wealth and domestic resources, there is massive potential for abuse.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the person writing the checks usually wants to call the shots. If a wealthy individual is fully underwriting this traveling network, doesn't that give them an incredible amount of leverage?
You have just identified the core vulnerability of the early church. The Greco-Roman world was entirely structured around an honor-shame paradigm and the system of patronage.
How did that patronage system actually work?
Well, a wealthy patron, the patronus, would provide resources, legal protection, or financial support to a client. In return, the client owed the patron public honor, absolute loyalty, and political support. It was a formal mechanism of status control.
So it's like, I am paying for your food and your travel, which means I own a piece of your loyalty. You are going to teach what I want you to teach, and you're going to publicly defer to my authority.
Right.
It's an ancient version of an aggressive investor leveraging their board seat to control the founder of a company.
Precisely. And the danger was that Christian hospitality would be co-opted and corrupted by secular patronage. A wealthy house church leader could easily use their resources to control the traveling teachers and build their own local empire, effectively cutting off the community from the broader apostolic network.
Which is terrifying for a decentralized movement.
Exactly. This is why the elder introduces a vital qualifier. He states that these itinerant workers are traveling for the sake of the name.
The name being a reverent shorthand for Jesus.
Yes. By insisting the work is done for the sake of the name, the elder completely subverts the Roman social order. The hospitality is no longer a private transactional exchange designed to increase the honor of the wealthy host.
It takes the ego out of it.
It is a corporate mission submitted to the authority of Christ. The host does not own the missionary. and the missionary does not grovel to the host. They are both subordinate to a higher authority, working as equal partners.
This paints such a vivid picture of the fragility of this network. The entire movement hinges on local leaders who have the wealth to sustain the mission, but the humility to refuse the cultural temptation of patronage.
And that is a very delicate balance.
It really is. Which brings us directly to the first of our three character profiles. We have looked at the economics, now we look at the people. The letter opens by focusing on a man who is navigating this high-stakes hospitality perfectly. Enter Gaius.
Gaius is the primary recipient of the letter and serves as the elder's model of local leadership done right. Historically, his precise identity is elusive because Gaius was one of the most common names in the Roman Empire.
It was like the John Smith of the first century.
Exactly. But his function in the text is clear. He is a prominent believer, undoubtedly a house church host, who possesses the resources to engage in this vital hospitality.
I am picturing him not necessarily as a formal pastor with an official title, but simply as the guy with the biggest house who has taken on the massive responsibility of keeping the local network alive.
That's a great way to visualize it.
The elder opens the letter in verses 1 through 4 with this overflowing commendation. He is deeply joyful because Gaius is doing it right. But there is a specific pastoral wish in verse 2 that I want to dissect because it is heavily abused in modern contexts.
Know exactly the verse you mean.
Yeah, the elder prays that Gaius may enjoy good health and that all may go well with him, even as his soul is getting along well.
You are referring to how this verse is often weaponized by modern prosperity theology.
Yes, exactly. In some contemporary circles, this single verse is extracted from its historical context and turned into a divine legal contract. The argument goes, if your soul is healthy, meaning you have enough faith, God guarantees you will have perfect physical health and abundant material wealth. And if you are sick or poor, well, it's a symptom of weak faith.
Right.
How does our source document, the Velocity survey, handle the actual context of that phrase?
The survey explicitly dismantles that interpretation. It clarifies that this is a standard first-century epistolary convention.
An epistolary convention, like a standard greeting.
Right. When you wrote a letter in the Greco-Roman world, it was just customary to include a warm greeting wishing the recipient physical well-being. It is a pastoral wish for holistic health, driven by genuine affection. It is not a theological guarantee or a blanket doctrinal promise of material prosperity.
It's the ancient equivalent of writing, "Hope you are doing well and staying healthy," at the top of an email.
Exactly. The elder is simply looking at a friend who is bearing an immense burden for the church, recognizing his robust spiritual health and affectionately praying that his physical body holds up under the strain.
You aren't offering them a magical shield against all disease. You are just being a caring human being. And that care is rooted in how Gaius is living. Our source breaks down three key Greek terms from this opening section that define Gaius's character: agapete, aletheia, and peripeteme. Let's unpack the linguistic mechanics here.
Well, the elder repeatedly addresses Gaius as agapete, which translates to beloved or dear friend. This immediately establishes that their relationship is not merely administrative. It is covenantal, warm, and deeply intimate.
Okay, so there's genuine love there.
Yes. Then we encounter aletheia, the Greek word for truth, which dominates both the opening and closing of this short letter. But we must understand truth through the specific lens of Johannine theology.
Because in our modern Western context, which is heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, we tend to think of truth as an abstract concept. It is a cognitive reality. I read a statement, my brain agrees with the logic of the statement, therefore I possess the truth. It's a mental file I keep stored in my head.
Right, but the Johannine conception of truth is fundamentally different. It is not merely intellectual assent to a set of propositions. Which brings us to the third word, peripeteme, which means to walk or to conduct oneself.
To walk.
Yes. The elder rejoices not because Gaius holds the correct opinions in his mind, but because Gaius is walking in the truth. This is the essential Johannine tearing. Theology and ethics are fused. Truth is an embodied reality.
I love the analogy of walking. We often treat truth as a destination, you know? You go on a spiritual or intellectual journey, you arrive at the truth, you plant your flag, and you are done.
Or we treat it like a diploma you frame and hang on the wall to prove you are orthodox.
Exactly. But walking implies continuous, exhausting motion. It implies friction. Truth isn't the destination, it's the pavement you hit every single day. You have to take a step and then another step. And for Gaius, those steps were incredibly tangible.
His theology became sociological reality. The elder is thrilled because Gaius's intellectual belief in the gospel is made visible when he physically opens his door, cooks a meal, washes the feet of a traveling stranger, and hands over his own money to fund their journey.
He puts his money where his mouth is.
Right. The pastoral aim of the elder is a truth-shaped life, and Gaius is the living proof that the system works.
But the system only works if the people involved surrender their egos. And as we know, human nature rarely surrenders quietly.
No, it certainly doesn't.
So if Gaius represents the beauty of a shared mission, the letter pivots with jarring speed in verses 9 and 10 to show us the catastrophic alternative. We move from the generous host to the villain of the text. Let's examine the pathology of Diotrephes, the antipastor.
The transition is stark. If Gaius is the blueprint for virtuous leadership, Diotrephes is the ultimate case study in toxic governance. The elder outlines a specific sequence of actions that Diotrephes has taken, and it amounts to a complete hostile takeover of his local community.
Let's look at the actual mechanics of his takeover. What exactly is Diotrephes doing to consolidate his power?
Well, the elder lists 4 aggressive maneuvers. First, Diotrephes actively and publicly rejects the apostolic authority of the elder. When the elder writes to the community, Diotrephes refuses to acknowledge the correspondence or submit to its guidance.
So he just ignores the emails from the founder.
Exactly. Second, he engages in unjust, malicious speech. He is actively slandering the elder and spreading disinformation about the apostolic network to his local congregation.
So he is running a smear campaign to isolate his people from outside influence.
Right. He is controlling the narrative. Third, he flatly refuses to practice the hospitality we just discussed. When the itinerant missionaries arrive, he slams the door in their faces. But his fourth action is the most revealing and destructive. He does not merely refuse to help, he actively excommunicates any member of his local church who attempts to offer hospitality.
Let's pause on that, because for a modern listener, getting kicked out of a church might just mean you drive down the street and attend a different building the next Sunday. It's an annoyance, maybe an emotional hurt, but it isn't socially fatal. What does it actually mean to be excommunicated from a house church network in the 1st century Roman Empire?
It was a form of social and economic death. The early Christian community functioned as an alternative kinship group. In a society where your biological family, your trade guild, and your civic identity were entirely entwined with pagan worship and secular patronage, becoming a Christian often meant being marginalized from normal Roman society.
So you've already burned all your bridges just by joining this group.
Yes, the church became your primary safety net. If Diotrephes forcefully expels a member from the house church, he is stripping them of their social support, their economic safety net, and their communal identity. He is weaponizing the vulnerability of his own people to maintain absolute control.
That is absolutely terrifying. He is holding his entire congregation hostage. He's saying, if you act like Gaius, if you show generosity to these travelers, I will destroy your social life. What drives a leader to do this? Our source points to a very specific Greek term that diagnoses the root cause of this behavior.
Yeah, the psychological core of Diotrephes is captured in the word philoprochien.
Philoprochi.
Right. It is a compound term that translates to loving to be first, or possessing a consuming desire for preeminence. The survey identifies this as the moral center of the elder's warning. Diotrephes' primary issue is not necessarily a nuanced theological heresy. His heresy is his ambition. His core problem is domination.
Loving to be first. We have all encountered this exact psychological profile. I mean, for you listening, trying to map this onto your own life, think about the toxic middle manager who hoards vital information so no one else on the team can succeed without them.
We all know that person.
Exactly. Or think about the gatekeepers in a community organization who cares more about protecting their own administrative turf than advancing the actual mission. Think about the leader who uses their authority to isolate, silence, and punish anyone who threatens their spotlight.
Yes, the clothes are different, the technology is different, but the pathology of philoprochien is identical.
It's timeless.
It really is. It is the dark side of the patronage system we discussed earlier. Diotrephes is likely leveraging his wealth, his property, and his social status to act as the ultimate gatekeeper. He views the traveling missionaries and the elders' influence not as partners in the gospel, but as direct threats to his local monopoly on power.
Now, our source document mentions a fascinating historical debate regarding Diotrephes. Some scholars question whether he was an early monoepiscopal bishop, while others argue he was just an overly assertive local patron. Can you explain what a monoepiscopal bishop is and why that distinction matters for understanding the transition of the early church?
Sure. A monepiscopal bishop refers to a church structure where a single, authoritative ruling bishop holds absolute jurisdiction over a local church or an entire city.
Like a CEO of the local church.
Exactly. This model became highly formalized and standard in the 2nd century, championed by figures like Ignatius of Antioch as a way to maintain unity and guard against heresy. The historical debate asks, was Diotrephes legitimately claiming an early official version of this title, and the elder is pushing back against this new organizational model? Or was Diotrephes simply a wealthy individual throwing his weight around informally because his name was on the deed to the house?
So is this an institutional debate about the role of a bishop, or a behavioral debate about a bully with deep pockets?
Exactly. And while the historical consensus leans toward him being an assertive patron rather than holding a formalized office, the source notes that his behavior is the primary focus. This introduces what scholars call negative ecclesiology.
Negative ecclesiology. So learning how a system should work by studying a spectacular failure.
Precisely. Diotrephes demonstrates that authority, when detached from truth and detached from the vulnerability of hospitality, rapidly degenerates into coercion. Leadership that prioritizes its own preeminence above the shared mission becomes fundamentally destructive. The elder documents this behavior to provide the network with a diagnostic tool.
Which brings up a massive logistical problem. You have Gaius on one side, opening his doors and funding the mission. You have Diotrephes on the other side, running a smear campaign, slamming doors, and kicking people out of his living room.
Right, it's chaos.
In a highly decentralized network stretching across the Roman Empire, without digital background checks, without a central HR department, and without instant communication, how does anyone know who is safe? If a stranger knocks on Gaius's door claiming to be a missionary, how does Gaius know he isn't letting in an agent of Diotrephes, or just a charlatan looking for a free meal?
That is the precise vulnerability of an itinerant network. And it leads us directly to the third and final character in our letter, who serves as the solution to this logistical crisis.
Enter Demetrius and the ancient art of the reference check.
Yes, Demetrius is introduced in verses 11 and 12. The elder pivots from warning Gaius not to imitate the evil of Diotrephes to offering Demetrius as the model of the good.
Okay, so he's the gold standard.
Right. It is overwhelmingly probable that Demetrius is the actual courier of this letter. He is the man physically standing on Gaius's doorstep, holding the papyrus.
I love that image. So Demetrius hands Gaius the letter, Gaius unrolls it, and reads a real-time endorsement of the guy standing right there in his foyer.
Exactly. But the elder doesn't just write, hey, Demetrius is a good guy, you can trust him. He provides what our source calls a triple commendation.
What are the 3 layers of this ancient background check?
Well, the elder builds an ironclad case for Demetrius's credibility by citing 3 distinct sources of testimony. First, he writes that Demetrius has a good testimony from everyone, meaning he possesses a broad, publicly verifiable reputation for integrity among the wider Christian community.
So public consensus.
Right. Second, he is vouched for by the truth itself. And third, he has the explicit testimony of the elder and the apostolic leadership.
Let's look at the practical reality of this. From a sociological standpoint, this section of the letter is operating entirely as a first-century letter of recommendation. And we know from history that figures like the Roman orator Cicero or the Apostle Paul utilized these constantly.
They did.
This was the social currency of the ancient world.
Absolutely. In a society devoid of digital verification, letters of recommendation were the only way to extend a covering of trust across geographic distances. The elder is leveraging his own established relational authority to underwrite Demetrius.
It's like a verified badge on social media or a 5-star rating, but with actual eternal stakes.
Right. It establishes a vital principle for the early church. Spiritual authority and Christian character must be publicly testable. You cannot simply arrive in a city and declare yourself a prophet. Your reputation must be verified by the community and vetted by recognized leadership.
The first and third commendations make total logical sense to me. He is peer-reviewed by the public, and he is expert-reviewed by the elder. But I want to drill down into the second commendation because it sounds incredibly abstract.
The one about the truth.
Yeah. What does it mean to be vouched for by the truth itself? How does a philosophical concept act as a character reference for a human being?
It brings us right back to the Johannine understanding of aletheia truth as an embodied reality. When the elder states that Demetrius is vouched for by the truth itself, he is saying that if you take the objective ethical demands of the gospel of Jesus Christ and use them as a measuring stick against Demetrius's daily life, his life aligns perfectly.
So the truth isn't a character witness testifying in a courtroom. The truth is the blueprint, and Demetrius is the building built exactly to code.
That is a perfect way to articulate it. His actions, his humility, and his service are so profoundly aligned with the teachings of Jesus that the gospel itself serves as his resume.
Wow.
The convergence of these three testimonies, the broad community, the objective standard of truth, and the vetted apostolic leadership, creates a foolproof model for credible ministry. Demetrius is the verified, safe, and faithful partner. Gaius can open his door and his wallet without fear.
We have spent a lot of time analyzing the mechanics of this ancient drama. We have Gaius the generous, Diotrephes the toxic gatekeeper, and Demetrius the verified courier. We've looked at the brutal reality of ancient inns and the high-stakes economics of house church hospitality.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But now we have to synthesize this. We have to zoom out and ask the ultimate so what question. Why did this hyperlocal 15-verse memo about a housing dispute survive to become part of the biblical canon, and what does it demand of you, the modern listener?
Well, our source, the Velasquez Survey, provides a compelling redemptive historical analysis to answer that exactly. 3 John does not introduce sweeping new doctrines about the nature of God or the end of the world.
No new theology.
Right. Its contribution belongs to the phase of salvation history where the church is learning to consolidate and govern itself under the guidance of the Spirit. It proves that the new covenant is not merely an inward, private spiritual feeling. It requires concrete ecclesial practice.
It is the messy administrative reality of keeping the network alive. How do you receive people? How do you fund them? How do you spot a narcissist trying to hijack the community?
Yes, and the source highlights a profound Christ-centered interpretation that anchors all of this. Even though the name Jesus does not explicitly appear in the text, he is the gravitational center of the entire conflict.
That goes back to the phrase in verse 7 where the elder says the missionaries went out for the sake of the name.
Exactly. That phrase centers the entire missionary enterprise on the honor and authority of Christ. It creates the ultimate contrast. Diotrephes operates out of a love for his own preeminence. He wants his own name to be exalted.
Right.
But the true mission is driven by a desire to honor the name of Jesus. And we must remember that Jesus radically redefined the concept of authority. In the Roman world, authority was synonymous with domination, leverage, and patronage.
The guy with the gold makes the rules.
Exactly. But Jesus taught and demonstrated through the cross that true greatness is found in self-giving service. Diotrephes is a regression into the worldly model of domination. Gaius and Demetrius represent the Christ-like model of vulnerability and partnership.
I think this is where the text directly challenges the modern listener, especially those of us in highly individualized Western cultures. We have a profound tendency to treat our beliefs as purely internal cognitive realities. It's just me and my personal truth.
Yeah, that's a very modern mindset.
We can listen to a deep dive like this, read a theology book, or agree with a philosophical concept and think, I am walking in the truth. But the standard set by 3 John is terrifyingly practical.
The challenge is absolute. The vision of the New Testament insists on networked ministry, mutual support, and intense physical accountability.
It essentially says that if your beliefs do not actively cost you something, if they do not affect your bank account, if they do not dictate who you allow into your home, and if they do not change how you share power and influence in your workplace or community, then your beliefs are not real yet.
They're just ideas.
Exactly. You are not walking in the truth. Truth and love cannot be theoretical. Christian generosity is not an optional, charitable add-on. It is the actual labor of the gospel.
And conversely, authority must always remain relational and accountable. There is a deep significance to how the elder concludes the letter in verses 13 through 15.
How does he end it?
He states that he has much more to write, but he refuses to continue using pen and ink. He states his desire to come and speak face to face.
He doesn't want to manage a crisis from afar via memo. He wants physical, relational fellowship.
Because true leadership cannot be sustained purely through administrative correspondence. It requires physical presence, shared vulnerability, and mutual accountability. The elder knows that to truly defeat the toxic isolationism of Diotrephes, he must show up in person and embody the truth alongside Gaius.
Wow, this has been an incredibly illuminating journey. We started with the absolute shortest book in the New Testament, a tiny, heavily debated letter, and it opened up an entire universe of human complexity.
It really did.
To quickly recap the ground we've covered, we navigated the dangerous, dusty roads of first-century Asia Minor. We examined the terrifying reality of ancient public inns and realized why the massive economic and protective burden of hospitality fell entirely on the private living rooms of the house churches.
Right.
We met Gaius, the wealthy host who embodied the truth by absorbing the cost of the mission. We diagnosed the pathology of Diotrephes, the toxic gatekeeper whose obsession with being first led him to weaponize excommunication and fracture his community. And we verified Demetrius, the courier whose life was so aligned with the gospel that the truth itself served as his ultimate background check.
It is a profound micro-study of early Christian dynamics. It serves as a permanent reminder that true leadership in healthy communities are measured by their commitment to truth, their capacity for sacrificial love, and their willingness to engage in hospitable partnership, vehemently rejecting the temptation of self-exalting control.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a highly practical and provocative thought. For a moment, strip away the first century context. Imagine that an observer is writing a 15-verse memo about the culture you create.
That's a challenging thought.
Think about your workplace, your local community organization, your friend group, or even your own home. Who are the characters in that letter? If someone were to document how you manage resources, power, and relationships, what would they see?
Right. Would they see a Diotrephes or a Gaius?
Exactly. Would they describe someone obsessed with their own status, building walls to hoard influence, and isolating anyone who challenges their spotlight? Or would they describe someone deliberately building a longer table, absorbing the cost of hospitality, and welcoming others into shared success?
It all comes down to the door.
It does. The ancient world understood a fundamental reality that our sanitized modern culture often tries to ignore. What you do with your front door tells the world absolutely everything about your heart. So the question you have to answer today is simply this. What is your door saying? Keep questioning, keep exploring the history beneath the surface, and keep walking in the truth.